The sun hung heavy over Georgia, casting waves of heat across Fort Benning. Dust clung to every bootstep as a fresh batch of recruits marched into the training grounds, their uniforms crisp, their expressions ranging from nervous anticipation to cocky bravado. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and freshly mown grass, an unmistakable scent of discipline. Drill instructors barked orders that echoed off the barracks like rifle fire. Among the dozens of new faces was Sarah Cohen's, a 22-year-old with chestnut hair neatly tied into a bun beneath her cap. Unlike most, she didn't fidget with nerves or crack jokes to ease the tension. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned her surroundings with the quiet observation of someone used to watching before acting. The moment she stepped near the weapons rack, whispers began. A line of rifles gleamed under the sun, each tagged and ready. Among them sat the M24 sniper rifle, long and heavy, its black finish reflecting the light like a predator lying in wait. "Bet she won't even lift it," one recruit muttered under his breath, elbowing the guy beside him. Another laughed softly. "Yeah, probably drop it the second she tries." Sarah heard them. She always did. She had learned long ago how to filter noise without showing reaction. Her face betrayed nothing, but deep inside, something twisted. Not anger, not fear. Something sharper in awareness that she was once again stepping into a space where she didn't belong in their eyes. The instructors began their introductions, but Sarah's gaze lingered on the M24. She ran her hand lightly along its barrel when it was her turn to inspect the weapons. The steel felt cold, heavier than it looked, but familiar in a way that eased her heart. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "A rifle isn't about power, Sarah. It's about patience." Breath steady, mind steady. She adjusted the sling over her shoulder and tested the rifle's weight. Her arms trembled slightly. The M24 was no toy, weighing nearly 15 pounds with optics. The recruits watching her burst into quiet laughter. "See? Told you," one whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Sarah didn't flinch. She placed the rifle down carefully on the table, inspecting the bolt, checking the scope alignment. While the others rushed through their inspection, handling their weapons like kids unwrapping gifts, Sarah took her time. Every movement was deliberate, as though she were reacquainting herself with an old friend. The drill instructor, Sergeant Davis, a broad-shouldered veteran with scars across his knuckles, raised an eyebrow as he watched. He wasn't impressed by speed, he was impressed by control. Still, he caught the smirks exchanged between the recruits and made a mental note. "Recruits," Davis barked, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "These rifles don't care about your jokes. They don't care about your pride. They demand respect. Treat them like extensions of your body, or they'll punish you for it." The laughter stopped instantly, though Sarah could still feel the judgmental eyes burning into her. Later that afternoon, during a break, the recruits gathered under the shade of a tree. Most were exchanging names, swapping stories about high school football or small-town adventures. Sarah sat apart, quietly cleaning the weapon she'd been assigned. She unwrapped the cleaning kit with care, laying out each piece in order. "Look at her," one recruit scoffed. "Already acting like she knows better." Another smirked. "She probably read about rifles in some book. This isn't hunting in the woods, sweetheart. This is the army." Sarah's hands moved steadily, ignoring them. She had, in fact, hunted in the woods long hours with her father, lying belly down in grass, controlling her breath as deer moved through the trees. Those lessons weren't about pulling the trigger. They were about waiting, about listening, about knowing when the shot mattered. She said nothing to the boys. Words, she had learned, never silenced laughter. Only results did. That night in the barracks, the noise was almost unbearable. Recruits wrestled, laughed, and argued about who would pass and who would wash out. Sarah sat on her bunk, rifle disassembled in front of her. Piece by piece, she studied it under the dim light, memorizing the feel of each part, how they locked together, how they came apart. She practiced sliding the bolt, practiced adjusting the scope, practiced lifting and steadying the rifle until her muscles ached. From across the room, one of the louder recruits, a tall farm boy named Miller, sneered. "What's the point? You think being teacher's pet is going to save you when the real test comes?" Sarah didn't look up. "No," she said calmly. "Practice will." The room went quiet for a moment before laughter erupted again, but it sounded thinner this time, forced. Some of the recruits, though still grinning, began to notice that she wasn't rattled. By the end of the week, Sarah had become a paradox to them. She didn't crack under their teasing, but she also didn't rise to fight back. She wasn't cocky, but she wasn't weak. She carried herself with a kind of quiet certainty that unsettled them more than her mistakes did. And though most still laughed when she fumbled with the weight of the rifle during drills, a few began to glance sideways, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than they had assumed. For Sarah, the laughter was background noise. Her focus remained on one thing: learning the M24 inside and out, preparing for the test day that she knew would come. She wasn't here to change their minds. She was here to master herself. When lights went out and snores filled the room, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The echo of her father's words guided her heartbeat. "Patience, Sarah. Breath steady, mind steady." Her hands ached, her body was sore, but her determination burned brighter than ever. Tomorrow, and every day after, she would rise earlier, stay later, and practice longer. She didn't need their approval. She only needed the shot. And deep inside, Sarah knew. When the time came, the laughter would stop. The second week of training had begun, and the Georgia heat showed no mercy. By mid-morning, sweat dripped down every recruit's face as they assembled on the range for rifle drills. Dust rose with each shuffle of boots, hanging in the air like a curtain. Today was different. Today, they weren't just holding rifles. They would fire them for the first time. The M24 rifles were lined neatly on the benches, bolts locked open, their long barrels gleaming in the light. Sergeant Davis strode in front of the group, his boots pounding the gravel. His voice cut through the murmurs like a whip. "Recruits, today you'll learn what separates soldiers from civilians. A rifle is not a toy. It is precision. It is control. It demands respect, and if you can't give it that, it will expose you." The recruits stiffened, though a few smirked. For many, this was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to prove themselves, to feel the power of a weapon in their hands. Sarah stood at the far end of the line, her M24 cradled carefully. She kept her eyes forward, but her ears caught the whispers from two recruits just a few feet away. "She's gonna fall on her face the second she pulls the trigger. Yeah, bet she closes her eyes when she fires." Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She wasn't here for them. She reminded herself of the long summer afternoons back home in Kentucky, when her father had taken her to a makeshift range in the woods. She remembered lying in the tall grass, the smell of dirt and gun oil, the sound of cicadas buzzing. "Patience, Sarah. Breath steady, mind steady." Sergeant Davis barked orders. "Prone position. Prepare rifles." The recruits dropped to the ground, some clumsy, some practiced. Sarah moved with deliberate care, lowering herself onto the mat, positioning the rifle and adjusting the scope. The weight of the M24 pressed into her shoulder, heavier than she liked, but familiar. First target 300 meters. "Fire on my command," Davis shouted. One by one, rifles cracked down the line. The sound was deafening, echoing off the trees. Sarah watched her target through the scope, aligning the crosshairs. She squeezed the trigger crack, and the recoil jolted her shoulder. She blinked, steadied, and checked the target. The bullet had landed slightly off-center, but it was a hit. "Not bad," Davis muttered, pacing behind her. The recruits to her left weren't as subtle. Miller, the tall farm boy, glanced at her target and snorted. She barely hit it, fluke. Sarah didn't respond. She reloaded smoothly, adjusted her scope, and prepared for the next distance. At 400 meters, her shot landed closer to the center. At 500, she steadied her breathing, remembering her father's rhythm. Inhale, exhale, pause, squeeze. The shot rang true, clipping the bullseye. This time, the laughter around her faltered. Still, her movements weren't perfect. The M24's weight strained her arms. Her cheek pressed too hard against the stock. Every mistake she noticed, she corrected quietly. While others boasted loudly about their kills, Sarah stayed silent, making mental notes, adjusting, refining. During a break, Miller swaggered over, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not bad for a beginner. But let's see you try 800 meters. That rifle's not just about hitting targets, it's about strength. And you don't have it." Sarah looked up from where she was cleaning her bolt. "Strength fades," she said evenly. "Discipline doesn't." Miller smirked, but there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. The next round of drills pushed the recruits harder. Targets were moved farther back 600, then 800 meters. The chatter grew quieter as frustration spread. Bullets missed wide, just kicking up around the steel plates. Hitting at these distances wasn't about luck. It was about patience, breathing, and precision qualities few had mastered. When Sarah's turn came, the murmurs grew again. Some still waited for her to fail, but others watched with curiosity now. She lay flat, the M24 steady on its bipod. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, and squeezed. Clang! The sound of steel rang clear at 600 meters. A few heads turned. She adjusted, aimed again, and fired. Another hit. At 800 meters, she hesitated. Her arms ached from the rifle's weight. Sweat stung her eyes. She blinked hard, forcing focus, and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck just outside the center, but it hit. Sergeant Davis raised his brows, making a note on his clipboard. "Not perfect, but better than most of you," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The recruits shuffled uncomfortably. Miller scowled. By the end of the day, Sarah had proven one thing clearly. She wasn't the weakest link. She wasn't the fastest, the strongest, or the loudest, but she was consistent. And consistency was a soldier's best weapon. That night, back in the barracks, the laughter aimed at her was quieter. A few recruits still cracked jokes, but their voices carried less confidence. Sarah ignored them all, focusing instead on disassembling and cleaning the M24. Every piece of the rifle gleamed under her careful hands. She practiced lifting it, balancing it, dry firing with steady breaths. Her arms shook with exhaustion, but she pushed through, training her muscles as much as her mind. When Miller passed by, he sneered. "You think all that polishing is going to make you better? You'll choke when it counts." Sarah didn't look up. "We'll see," she said calmly. Miller frowned, unsettled by her composure. A days stretched on, each one harder than the last. The recruits learned to fire in different positions, adjust for wind, and shoot under pressure. Many faltered. Some grew frustrated. Sarah stayed steady, improving quietly. She wasn't the best not yet. But she was no longer the one everyone dismissed. She was becoming something harder to mock, a competitor. And though she knew the real test was still to come, she felt something shift that week. The laughter had grown softer. The whispers less cruel, the smirks fewer. For the first time, Sarah sensed it respect, faint and grudging, but growing. And deep inside, she knew she hadn't even shown them her best yet. The days at Fort Benning settled into a rhythm. Dawn brought the shrill blast of whistles, boots hitting the dirt in unison, and the relentless barking of drill instructors. By nightfall, the recruits were sore, blistered, and exhausted, collapsing onto their bunks with little energy left for anything beyond jokes and grumbling. For most, that was the end of the day. For Sarah Collins, it was only the beginning. When the barracks lights dimmed and voices turned rowdy, Sarah quietly unpacked her rifle cleaning kit. She laid everything out with precision on the narrow table at the end of her bunk oil. Cloths, brushes, rods, and the disassembled M24, piece by piece. She cleaned and inspected, her hands steady, her expression calm. To her, the weapon wasn't just metal and optics. It was discipline. It was trust. It was, in many ways, the difference between life and death. The other recruits noticed. "Look at her," one snickered, tossing a deck of cards onto his bed. "She's babysitting that thing like it's her boyfriend." Laughter rippled across the room. Sarah didn't glance up. She wiped the bolt clean, checked the firing pin, and set it aside to dry. Miller, the farm boy who had mocked her since the first day, leaned over his bunk. "You think all that scrubbing's gonna make you a better shot? Hate to break it to you, Collins, but this ain't about cleaning. It's about muscle, speed, instinct. And you don't have it." Sarah finally looked at him, her eyes calm but piercing. "Instinct doesn't mean anything without control," she said evenly. "And control comes from repetition." Miller smirked, but his smirk faltered when she turned away, ignoring him. The truth was, Sarah didn't clean the rifle just for maintenance. She studied it, learning every groove and spring. She practiced reassembling it in the dark, until her fingers knew the pieces by memory. She rehearsed trigger discipline, dry-fired into empty space, and controlled her breathing inhale, exhale, pause, squeeze. She even lay prone on her bunk at times, sighting imaginary targets across the barracks wall, timing each breath with the rhythm of her heart. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. But it was discipline. Some recruits laughed. Some shook their heads. But just a few watched quietly. One evening, after another grueling day of drills, Sarah noticed a shadow lingering near her bunk. It was Rodriguez, a stocky recruit from New Mexico who rarely spoke. "You practice every night," Rodriguez said softly. Sarah glanced up. "Yeah. Why?" She paused, wiping the scope with a cloth. "Because I need to know this rifle better than I know myself. Because when it counts, there won't be time to wonder if I'm ready. I'll either be ready or I won't." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Makes sense." Without another word, he walked away. That was the first time Sarah realized not everyone thought her strange. Some understood. The days grew hotter, the drills more demanding. Recruits fired at longer ranges, practiced in crosswinds, and were forced to crawl through mud under barbed wire with rifles in hand. Many cursed under their breath, frustrated at missed shots and aching shoulders. Sarah stayed silent. She absorbed every correction, every mistake, and stored it away like ammunition. Sergeant Davis noticed. During one drill, when recruits had to shoot prone after sprinting 50 meters with full packs, Sarah's shot rang true, even though her arms shook from fatigue. Davis crouched beside her, eyes narrowed. "You've been practicing, Collins?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied simply. He studied her a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod. That night, Sarah repeated the drill in her head, adjusting her breathing, visualizing the recoil. While others complained about blisters and heat rashes, She traced the motions of shooting over and over until her muscles remembered. But dedication wasn't without doubt. Some nights, when the barracks fell silent and the glow of the moon spilled through the window, Sarah lay awake questioning herself. Was she overdoing it? Was she really capable of beating those who seemed naturally stronger, faster, louder? She felt the weight of every whisper, every laugh. Her father's voice returned to her in those moments. Patience, Sarah. A shot isn't about who's loudest or strongest or fastest. It's about who can wait, who can breathe, who can steady their mind. She clung to those words like armor. One particularly brutal evening, after the recruits had spent hours in the rain during field drills, most collapsed in exhaustion. Sarah sat dripping wet on her bunk, mud still caked on her boots, and disassembled the M24 yet again. Her hands trembled with fatigue, but she forced them steady. Miller's voice cut through the room. Still at it? You're crazy. This time, Rodriguez answered for her from across the room. She's not crazy. She's dedicated. The room went quiet. Miller scowled, but said nothing more. For Sarah, it wasn't about winning anyone's approval. It was about readiness. She knew the real test was coming, the sniper qualification. That would separate those who could handle the rifle from those who couldn't. And when that day came, she wanted no doubt in her mind. As the weeks passed, the laughter aimed at her grew quieter. Some still mocked, but fewer voices joined in. Others began to nod subtly when she hit her targets, even if they didn't say it aloud. Respect was forming, not openly, not spoken, but present nonetheless. Still, Sarah remained unchanged. She didn't gloat, didn't smile smugly, didn't bask in small victories. Each night, she cleaned her rifle as if she had failed that day, as if she had everything left to prove. And in truth, she did, because deep inside, Sarah knew. She hadn't shown them her best yet. The real test was still ahead. And when that day arrived, there would be no more room for whispers. Only silence. The morning of the rifle qualification dawned cool and sharp, the kind of autumn morning where every sound carried through the crisp air. The recruits were quieter than usual as they assembled at the range. There was no joking, no idle chatter. Each of them knew today mattered. This was the day they would be tested not just on endurance or discipline, but on skill, the kind of skill that determined whether they could be trusted with a sniper's rifle. Sarah Collins stood at the end of the line, boots planted firmly in the gravel. Her M24 rested against her shoulder, its black finish absorbing the pale morning light. She felt the weight of it, familiar now, no longer foreign or clumsy. The instructors had been preparing them for weeks. They had drilled breathing techniques, scope adjustments, and recoil management. But now the targets were set farther than many had ever tried before. At 300 meters, then 600, 800, and finally 1,000 meters, the steel plates gleamed faintly in the distance, like tiny silver coins pinned against the horizon. Sergeant Davis paced in front of them, clipboard in hand. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. This test is simple. You will fire at each distance. You will demonstrate control, patience, and accuracy. Fail too many, and you will not pass. This is not about luck. This is about skill. And skill can't be faked. The recruits nodded, stiff with nerves. First shooters on the line. Davis barked. One by one, recruits took their turns. Some did well at 300 and 400 meters, their shots ringing the steel targets. But as the distances increased, accuracy faltered. Bullets whipped past, missing wide, throwing up clouds of dust. The farther the targets, the quieter the line became. Confidence drained as reality sank in. Sarah watched carefully, noting their mistakes. Jerky trigger pulls. Rushed shots. inconsistent breathing. Each error was a lesson for her. She didn't smile, didn't shake her head, didn't revel in their failures. She simply absorbed what she saw. When Miller stepped up, he carried the M24 with exaggerated swagger. "Watch and learn," he muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. His first shot at 300 meters was solid, striking near center. At 400, he hit again. Confidence bloomed on his face. But at 600, his shot went wide. He cursed, adjusted, and hit the second try, but just barely. At 800, he missed completely. Twice. His jaw tightened, sweat beading at his temple. By the time he fired at 1,000 meters, the bullet went so wide the instructors didn't bother marking it. Miller returned to the line with clenched fists, muttering excuses under his breath. A few recruits smirked behind his back, though no one said it out loud. Finally, Davis called, "Collins on the line." The whispers started instantly. "This should be good. She won't even hit 300. Bet she cries when she misses." Sarah ignored them. She walked calmly to the mat, lowering herself into position with practiced ease. She unfolded the bipod, settled the rifle against her shoulder, and adjusted the scope. Her hands moved smoothly. No hesitation, no wasted motion. From behind, Davis raised a brow. He'd seen countless recruits handle rifles, but few with that kind of deliberate care. "Target 300 meters, he announced. Sarah inhaled, exhaled, paused. The crosshairs steadied. Crack! The shot rang out, and the steel plate echoed with a clean, satisfying clang. No one laughed. 600 meters. She adjusted the scope, steadied her breathing. Crack! The bullet struck near the center. Murmurs rippled down the line. 800 meters. Sarah tightened her grip, slowed her pulse. The world shrank until it was just her, the rifle, and the target. Crack! The steel rang again. Even the recruits who had mocked her before leaned forward now, eyes fixed on her. 1,000 meters, Davis called, his voice carrying a note of challenge. Sarah's heart thumped in her ears. She could feel the sweat gathering at the base of her neck, the burn in her arms from holding steady. 1,000 meters wasn't forgiving. Even seasoned shooters struggled. She adjusted her scope, accounting for distance, wind, and drop. She inhaled, exhaled, paused. Her fingers squeezed the trigger with the calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in silence. Crack! The bullet cut through the air. For a moment, there was only silence. Then clang! The 1,000-meter target sang with a clear, undeniable note. The range erupted not with laughter, but with stunned silence. Sarah lowered the rifle gently, her expression unchanged. Inside, adrenaline surged, but she kept her breathing even. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break composure. Davis scribbled on his clipboard, his lips twitching in the faintest hint of approval. He looked at her directly. "Solid shooting, Collins. Better than most." She nodded once. "Yes, Sergeant." When she returned to the line, the recruits parted slightly to let her pass. No one smirked. No one whispered. Even Miller avoided her eyes, his jaw tight with frustration. That evening, the barracks buzzed with talk of her shots. She actually hit 1,000. No way. I thought she'd choke. Davis even looked impressed. Sarah sat quietly on her bunk, disassembling her rifle as usual. She didn't join in the chatter, didn't correct their exaggerations, didn't seek their praise. She focused on her routine, steady hands moving over steel. Rodriguez, a quiet recruit who had once spoken with her, passed by and muttered, "Hell of a shot today." Sarah glanced up, offered a small nod, then returned to her work. The laughter that had once chased her in the barracks was gone. In its place was something heavier, quieter. Respect not openly spoken, but felt. And Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The real test wasn't over. But she had taken the first step. She had silenced the doubt. And from here on, things would never be the same. The sun was dipping low on the horizon when the recruits were finally dismissed from the range. The long day of shooting had left everyone drained, shoulders sore, ears ringing faintly from the constant crack of rifles. Dust clung to uniforms, and sweat had left marks on collars. But for once, the atmosphere wasn't filled with jokes or complaints. Every recruit kept glancing, almost unconsciously, at Sarah Collins. Her perfect performance, especially the 1,000-meter shot, still hung heavy in the air. For some, it was admiration they couldn't admit aloud. For others, like Miller, it was humiliation sharpened into quiet resentment. But for all of them, it was unforgettable. As they marched back toward the barracks, Sergeant Davis kept his expression neutral, though his mind was turning. He had seen recruits surprise him before, but Collins's control, her discipline, and above all, her accuracy, that was something different. He had reported countless shooters in his career. Very few could carry that level of consistency under pressure, and he knew someone else needed to see it. That evening, the recruits were still tending to their rifles when the unexpected happened. The barracks door swung open, and silence fell instantly. Commander Harris stepped inside. Every recruit snapped to attention so quickly the air seemed to snap with them. Harris was a man whose presence carried weight, a career soldier who had commanded units overseas and earned respect the hard way. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on each recruit before settling on Davis. "At ease," he said, though his tone kept the room stiff with discipline. He took a step forward, his boots echoing against the floor. "I hear we had some interesting results on the range today." No one spoke. Harris didn't need them to. His gaze shifted, almost inevitably, to Sarah Collins. "You," he said. Sarah straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir. I hear you hit 1,000 meters. Clean." Her jaw tightened slightly. She had expected whispers, maybe word traveling among the recruits. But for it to reach the commander so quickly, she hadn't planned for that. "Yes, sir," she answered evenly. Harris studied her for a long moment. He wasn't just looking at her, he was measuring her, weighing what he saw against what he had been told. Finally, he nodded once. "Good shooting. Better than good. Some of these recruits couldn't hit half that distance if you gave them all day. And some have been boasting they could." A flicker of heat passed through the room. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably, Miller among them. Harris turned slightly, addressing the whole barracks. "You should all understand something. Skill doesn't come from who shouts the loudest or who laughs the hardest when someone else struggles. Skill comes from consistency, from discipline. And today, Collins proved she has both." The words struck like hammer blows. Not just because they came from a commander, but because they cut directly through the culture of mockery that had hung over Sarah since she arrived. For once, no one dared to laugh. Harris's gaze returned to Sarah. "Collins, tomorrow you'll report directly to me at the range." "I want to see it for myself." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. And with that, he turned and strode out, leaving the recruits stunned in his wake. The silence after he left was almost painful. No one quite knew what to say. For days, Sarah had been the butt of every joke, the target of every sneer. Now the commander himself had not only recognized her, but ordered a private evaluation. Rodriguez broke the silence first. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. Miller's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. He muttered something sharp under his breath, too low for anyone to catch. Sarah said nothing. She continued to field strip her rifle with the same calm efficiency she had shown since day one. But inside, a storm brewed. This wasn't just validation. It was pressure. Tomorrow she wouldn't just be proving herself against recruits. She'd be standing in front of the commander himself. Failure wasn't an option. The next morning, the range was empty except for Sarah, Sergeant Davis, and Commander Harris. The air was cool, the field quiet except for the distant rustle of wind in the grass. Harris stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Show me," he said simply. Sarah lay prone, set up the rifle, and adjusted the scope. She didn't let the silence rattle her. The targets were set. Again. 300, 600, 800, 1,000. She fired. Each shot rang true, the steel echoing back across the field. But Harris wasn't finished. He raised a hand. Beyond that ridge set up the 1,320-meter target. Davis blinked. That was over 3/4 of a mile. Even among experienced snipers, few trained recruits were tested at that distance. "Yes, sir," Davis replied, signaling to range staff. Sarah adjusted, her face calm but her pulse quickening. The distance stretched her limits, both technically and mentally. She studied the scope, adjusted for drop and wind, and controlled her breathing. The rifle cracked. Seconds passed. Then clang. The distant steel rang faintly, but unmistakably. Harris's expression didn't change much, but Davis swore he saw the corner of the man's mouth twitch upward. "Again," Harris ordered. Sarah fired once more. Again, the steel rang. When she lowered the rifle, Harris stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked down at her, then gave a single nod. "You're the best shot in this group. Don't waste it." For Sarah, it wasn't just praise. It was a command. By the time she returned to the barracks, word had already spread. The commander himself had tested her, and she had passed. The recruits fell silent when she walked in. Not mocking silence, not dismissive silence. Respectful silence, heavy with realization. For the first time since arriving, Sarah Collins was no longer just the girl trying to prove herself. She was something else entirely. The best sniper among them, and the one the commander himself had chosen to watch. The barracks felt different after the commander's visit. For weeks, Sarah had endured laughter and whispers at every turn, but now the atmosphere was heavier, almost cautious. The same recruits who once mocked her now kept their distance, unsure of how to treat someone the commander himself had recognized. Some nodded politely in passing, as if offering silent acknowledgement. Others muttered compliments that sounded awkward in their mouths. But Miller said nothing. He didn't need to. His glares told Sarah enough. Every time she cleaned her rifle, she felt his eyes on her. Every time they lined up for drills, he lingered nearby, his silence louder than insults. Resentment radiated off him like heat, but Sarah ignored it. She had endured worse than a bruised ego. Yet she knew it wasn't over. Rivals didn't fade quietly. They struck when the chance came. That chance arrived during the following week's exercises. The recruits were taken into the field for mock operations, scenarios meant to test teamwork as much as marksmanship. They hiked for miles with full packs, crawling through mud, navigating thick woods, and setting up firing positions while instructors barked orders. It was grueling, designed to push them to exhaustion. And exhaustion, the instructors knew, revealed character. Sarah worked methodically, conserving energy where she could, maintaining her rifle with precision, pacing herself during the marches. She wasn't the fastest, nor the loudest, but she didn't falter. Miller, on the other hand, was eager to prove something. He volunteered for point position, carried extra weight without being asked, and made sure everyone saw him pushing harder than the rest. The instructors noted his effort, but so did the recruits. Bravado only carried so far when sweat blurred vision and muscles screamed. On the second night, after a day of crawling through mud and rain, the recruits were ordered to set up camp. Harris and Davis appeared unexpectedly, their eyes scanning the exhausted group. "Tomorrow," Harris announced, "you will pair up for live exercises. Sniper and spotter. Accuracy will matter, but so will coordination. Choose carefully. A sniper without a good spotter is half blind." The recruits exchanged glances. Pairings mattered. Who you trusted could make or break the test. Rodriguez approached Sarah quietly. "Collins, you want a spotter?" Sarah nodded. Rodriguez wasn't flashy, but he was steady. He had a knack for observation, and he didn't waste words. She trusted that more than Miller's pride. When Miller saw them pair up, his jaw clenched. He scanned the group, finally settling on another recruit. Harris, no relation to the commander, who was eager but inexperienced. It was a poor match, but Miller didn't seem to care. His eyes never left Sarah. The exercise began at dawn. Teams were tasked with locating hidden targets across rugged terrain, spotting and eliminating them under time pressure. Each pair had to move quietly, stay concealed, and communicate with precision. Sarah and Rodriguez worked seamlessly. He spotted wind shifts and distance markers, feeding her quiet instructions. She adjusted her scope, fired, and struck steel again and again. At one point, Rodriguez noticed a glint far off, an instructor's test decoy designed to trick careless shooters. Sarah waited, confirmed, and held fire. It was the correct call. Miller's team, however, stumbled. His spotter miscalculated distances, and Miller overruled him harshly. Shots went wide. Frustration boiled into snapped words, and their concealment faltered as they argued. By the time the teams regrouped, the results were clear. Sarah and Rodriguez had led the pack, hitting every valid target with discipline. Miller had missed nearly half. Commander Harris observed quietly. As the teams assembled, his arms folded. Finally, he spoke. "Collins and Rodriguez, excellent coordination. That's how it's done." A ripple of murmurs ran through the group. Then Harris turned his gaze on Miller. "You've got a strong shot, Miller, but a poor sniper lets ego blind him. You didn't listen to your spotter. That's why you failed." The words struck Miller harder than any missed target. His face burned crimson, fists clenching, but he bit back a reply. Sarah, standing beside Rodriguez, kept her expression neutral. She didn't need to gloat. The truth was in the results. That night, tension snapped. As the recruits cleaned gear under dim lanterns, Miller finally spoke. "You think you're better than everyone because you hit some targets?" His voice was low, sharp. Sarah didn't look up. "I don't think anything. I just do the work." Miller stepped closer, his shadow stretching across her table. "You're not a soldier. You're just a fluke. A show the commander wanted to see. Don't get comfortable." The room went quiet. Recruits shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to watch. Sarah finally looked up, meeting his glare with calm eyes. "This isn't about you, Miller. It's about the job. And if you spent half as much time on your discipline as you do on your pride, you'd be the one getting recognized." The words cut deep. Miller's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it looked like he might explode. But he didn't. He turned, slammed his rifle case shut, and stormed out. The recruits exhaled collectively. Rodriguez shook his head. "That guy's going to be trouble." Sarah didn't disagree. But she wasn't afraid either. The next day, Harris announced another test. This one wasn't about accuracy. It was about endurance under stress. The recruits would run an obstacle course, packs loaded, and finish with precision shooting under simulated combat conditions. It was brutal. Mud, barbed wire crawls, walls to climb, trenches to cross. By the time they reached the shooting range, lungs burned and muscles ached. The challenge wasn't just marksmanship, it was whether they could shoot steady when their bodies screamed for rest. Sarah moved through the course steadily, conserving bursts of energy. She wasn't the first to reach the range, but when she lay prone and steadied her rifle, her breathing calmed quicker than most. Her shots rang true. Steel sang. Miller arrived before her, but his frustration showed. He rushed his shots, muscles trembling from exertion, and missed more than he hit. His curses echoed louder than his accuracy. When the test ended, Harris's verdict was clear. Collins topped marks again. Controlled, focused. That's how you balance body and mind. Miller's name wasn't even mentioned. By the end of the week, the lines were drawn. Sarah was no longer mocked openly. She was respected, though sometimes grudgingly. Rodriguez became her quiet ally. Others began asking her advice, and even Sergeant Davis seemed less skeptical. But Miller's resentment burned brighter each day. And Sarah knew that a soldier who let ego fester could be dangerous, not just to himself, but to those around him. And in the U.S. military, danger had consequences. The weeks rolled on, and Sarah's reputation only grew. She was no longer the quiet recruit cleaning her rifle in the corner while others laughed. Now, she was the one others turned to for calm advice before a shot, the one instructors nodded at when explaining form, the one who carried an aura of quiet certainty that no one could ignore. But one man refused to accept it. Miller's pride had been ground down day after day. First by Sarah's clean shots, and by her teamwork with Rodriguez, and finally by the commander's open recognition. He could endure mistakes. He could endure correction, but he could not endure being outshone by her. Not when everyone had laughed with him at the beginning. Not when he was supposed to be the best. And so his resentment turned to obsession. Every drill became a contest in his mind, every march a race, every shot a chance to prove himself. But the harder he tried, the worse he fared. His hands shook from rushing, his judgment clouded by anger. And every failure only deepened the darkness behind his eyes. Sarah noticed, of course. She noticed how his once boisterous voice had grown sharp, how his shoulders tightened whenever she walked by, how his gaze lingered too long. She didn't speak of it, but she prepared for it. Because she knew rivalries like his never ended quietly. It happened on a cold morning at the range. Commander Harris arrived unannounced, his presence instantly silencing the recruits. He scanned the line, his sharp gaze settling on Sarah, and then on Miller. "Today," Harris announced, "we're going to settle something." The recruits shifted nervously. They knew what he meant without him saying it. Harris continued, "Two recruits have stood out for very different reasons. Collins for her precision, Miller for his persistence." His tone carried the faintest edge of irony, but Miller straightened proudly, missing it. "So," Harris said, "you'll compete. Head to head. Endurance, accuracy, adaptability. We'll see who holds under pressure. And the rest of you watch closely. This is what separates a sniper from someone who only thinks he is." The challenge was set. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her face remained calm. She had nothing to prove, at least not to herself. But she also knew the commander's tests weren't for show. He wanted to measure her, to see if she could carry her composure against someone determined to break her. Miller smirked, finally feeling the spotlight shift back in his favor. A competition began with distance shooting. Both were given identical rifles and 10 rounds each at targets, ranging from 300 to 1,000 meters. Miller went first. His shots at 300 and 400 were clean, but as the distances stretched, his grouping wavered. He hit some, missed others, forcing corrections he should have made earlier. By the time he reached 1,000 meters, frustration bled into his movements. He hit once, missed twice. Sarah stepped up. Her breathing was steady, her hands calm. Each shot followed the same rhythm: inhale, exhale, pause, squeeze. The steel rang again and again, even at 1,000 meters. She didn't miss once. The recruits behind her whispered, but Harris said nothing. He simply signaled the next stage. Now came movement under stress. Both were loaded with full packs and ordered to run an obstacle course walls, wire crawls, trenches, and uphill climbs before taking shots at moving targets. Miller tore through the course with raw aggression, hurling himself over obstacles, clawing through mud, sprinting as if he could outrun exhaustion. By the time he reached the range, his chest heaved and his arms shook. His first shots went wide, then closer, but his accuracy suffered from fatigue. Sarah paced herself differently. She conserved bursts of energy, kept her breathing measured, and arrived later than Miller, but with steadier hands. Her shots were slower, but each one struck. "Discipline beats pride," Harris muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Davis to hear. Finally, Harris raised the stakes. "One last test," he said. "Concealment and patience. You'll each find a position in the field. You'll have 30 minutes. At the end, your target will appear. One shot. One chance." The recruits buzzed. This was the test every sniper dreaded and craved. Sarah and Miller were released into the woods with their rifles. The ground was damp, the foliage sparse in places, thick in others. They crawled, shifted, and dug into the earth. Miller found a position quickly, high on a ridge, giving him a wide view. But the angle was poor for concealment, and his movements left broken branches that an observer could spot. Sarah moved slower, methodical, using the terrain to break her outline, dragging mud and leaves over her uniform, blending until even her breathing matched the wind. Time dragged. Sweat trickled down faces. Muscles cramped. The silence pressed on them like weight. Then, at last, the target appeared, an instructor carrying a steel plate across the far field. Miller fired first. Too early. The bullet missed wide, snapping through branches. The recruits watching sucked in their breath. Sarah didn't move. She waited, patient as stone, until the target paused at just the right angle. Then, calm and deliberate, she squeezed. Clang, the steel rang. When the recruits regrouped, Harris didn't waste words. "Collins," he said firmly, "wins. Again." Miller's face went pale, then red. His fists shook at his sides, every vein in his neck straining. For a moment, Sarah thought he might explode in front of everyone. But instead, he turned sharply, storming away without permission, his boots crunching against the gravel until he disappeared beyond the barracks. The recruits stood in uneasy silence. Some looked at Sarah with awe, others with newfound respect, and a few with fear. Harris broke the tension. "You all saw the difference." Miller rushed. Collins waited. That's the heart of this work control. Without it, a sniper is nothing but a man with a rifle. He let his words hang heavy before dismissing the group. Later, back at the barracks, Rodriguez approached Sarah quietly. "He's not going to take this well," he said. Sarah nodded. She knew Miller's pride had shattered completely. Recognition hadn't humbled him, it had poisoned him further. And now, stripped of his last chance, he was unpredictable. But Sarah also knew this truth. In the military, control wasn't just about rifles or targets. It was about yourself. And no matter what Miller did next, she would hold her ground. Because the commander had been right. Patience wasn't just a skill, it was survival. And Sarah Collins had both. The camp had settled into a strange rhythm after the head-to-head challenge. Sarah's name carried weight now. Recruits who once mocked her now offered quiet respect. Even Sergeant Davis, once skeptical, treated her less as a trainee and more as a soldier in the making. But the uneasy peace couldn't last. Miller's failure had carved a scar into the group. He withdrew into himself, his swagger gone, replaced with brooding silence. He showed up to drills, performed them with mechanical precision, but his eyes burned whenever they landed on Sarah. Rodriguez wasn't wrong. He was dangerous. The danger came sooner than anyone expected. It was meant to be another field exercise, a long-range patrol through woodland with simulated enemy ambushes. Recruits were told to pack light and stay alert, moving in squads under the watchful eyes of instructors. It was supposed to be controlled chaos hardship without real risk. But nature didn't follow scripts. Halfway through the march, as the squads navigated a steep ridge, a deafening crack split the air. Not rifle firewood. A rotted tree gave way, crashing down the slope, its fall unpredictable. Chaos erupted. 2 recruits tumbled down with the tree, trapped beneath its heavy limbs. Shouts filled the air. The instructors scrambled, trying to maintain order. Dust and broken branches clouded visibility. Sarah dropped her pack instantly and sprinted toward the sound. Training had conditioned her to remain calm in gunfire drills, but this real screams, real blood triggered something deeper. When she reached the fallen tree, her heart clenched. One recruit was pinned by the leg, bleeding heavily, while the other was unconscious, his head dangerously close to a jagged rock. "Rodriguez!" Sarah shouted. He was already behind her, eyes wide but steady. "Pressure here," she ordered, pointing to the leg wound. He dropped without hesitation, applying his weight to stop the bleeding. Sarah scanned the slope. Moving the tree was impossible with bare hands. But farther up the ridge, the squad had ropes gear meant for climbing drills. She sprinted uphill, dodging branches, shouting orders at stunned recruits. "Ropes now. Secure to that trunk." Her voice carried command in a way it hadn't weeks before. No one questioned her. They moved, hands fumbling but fast. Within minutes, ropes were anchored. Sarah slid back down, mud smearing her uniform, and worked with Rodriguez to loop the ropes around the fallen tree. With the help of half the squad, they heaved. The tree shifted just enough to drag the pinned recruit free. His scream tore the air, but he was alive. The second recruit, unconscious, was stabilized and hauled carefully up the ridge. By the time the instructors arrived, breathless and pale, Sarah and Rodriguez had already organized the squad into carrying positions, moving the injured toward extraction. It wasn't flawless. The injured recruit lost a lot of blood. The other needed urgent medical attention. But without Sarah's speed, focus, and calm under pressure, both would have been dead. Back at camp, the incident spread like wildfire. The recruits whispered in awe now, not just about her shooting, but about how she had taken charge without hesitation. She hadn't just hit targets, she had saved lives. Commander Harris summoned her that evening. His office was stark, walls lined with maps and commendations. He stood behind his desk, arms folded, studying her with the same piercing gaze that had weighed her on the range. "You handled yourself well today," he said. Sarah shifted slightly. "I did what anyone would have done, sir." "Wrong," Harris said sharply. "I've seen plenty of soldiers freeze under less pressure. You didn't. You assessed, directed, acted. And you did it without waiting for someone else to tell you how." He let that sink in. Then his tone softened, just slightly. "That's leadership, Collins. Not just skill. Not just patience, leadership." For the first time since arriving at camp, Sarah felt the weight of his words settle inside her. Recognition not for her shots, not for her composure, but for something greater. Miller wasn't there when Sarah left Harris's office. He had been conspicuously absent since the accident, his presence dwindling to shadows. It wasn't until 2 nights later that he confronted her. She was in the equipment tent, checking her rifle when he stepped inside. His face was pale, his movements sharp. "You think you've won," he said flatly. Sarah looked up slowly. "This isn't a competition, Miller." "Everything's a competition," he snapped. "And you? You took everything. The respect, the recognition, even Harris. It should have been me." Sarah met his eyes, calm but firm. "It was you, Miller. Until you let your pride eat you alive." His jaw worked furiously. For a moment, she thought he might lash out. But instead, he turned and stalked away, leaving the tent flaps whipping in his wake. She exhaled slowly. He wasn't her enemy, not really. His pride was. And maybe, just maybe, he would see that one day. Graduation came weeks later. The recruits lined up in formation, uniforms pressed, boots shining, faces leaner and harder than when they first arrived. Harris inspected them personally, pausing briefly in front of Sarah. "Collins," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You came here doubted. You leave here respected. Remember what I told you, don't waste it." She nodded sharply. "Yes, sir." When the ceremony ended, recruits cheered, clapped each other on the back, and celebrated their survival. Sarah stood slightly apart, watching, her rifle case at her side. She wasn't one for noise or spectacle. Rodriguez found her, offering a rare smile. "You did it. We did it." She allowed herself a small smile in return. "We did." For the first time in months, the weight of doubt was gone. Not because Harris had recognized her, not because the recruits had stopped laughing, but because she had proven to herself that she belonged. Not just as a sniper, but as a soldier. And as the sun dipped low behind the training grounds, casting long shadows over the field, Sarah Collins stood tall, quiet as ever, her place among them no longer questioned. Because the commander had been right all along. She wasn't just the best shot here. She was the one who had endured, led, and risen when it mattered most. And that made her more than a sniper. It made her a soldier who would never be underestimated again.